My family ignored me for my golden child sister. Then came begging. So I shut the door on them. My name is Alex, I'm 24 now, and for as long as I can remember, I've felt like a spare wheel in my own family. I know a lot of people say stuff like that when they're upset, but I genuinely mean it. I was the firstborn, the older brother, the one who was supposed to get all the attention when I was little. But that's not how it went. My parents, Tom and Diane, always made it clear, not in words but in their actions, that my little sister Kate was the center of their world. She's 3 years younger than me, 21 now, and ever since she came into our lives, it was like I just stopped existing in their eyes. At least, that's how it felt. Kate always got the biggest slice of cake, the best Christmas presents, and all the praise, no matter what either of us did. I brought home a science fair trophy in 6th grade, first place in the whole district. I was so proud, held it up and everything, and my dad just nodded and asked me if I remembered to feed the dog that morning. A week later, Kate came home with a participant ribbon from her ballet recital, and Mom threw a little party in the living room. She literally baked a cake that said, "Our little star." I still remember how sugary and fake the frosting tasted when I forced myself to eat a slice. At first, I tried harder. I figured if I just kept achieving things, they'd eventually see me. I joined the soccer team, then the chess club. I learned guitar just to play a song for Mom on her birthday. But every time, it was like throwing pebbles into a black hole. No reaction. No pride. Just silence. Meanwhile, Kate would draw a half-scribbled cat and suddenly it was framed and hung in the hallway like it was the Mona Lisa. When I hit high school, I gave up trying to impress them. What was the point? They had their perfect child already. I focused on school, worked part-time jobs, saved up for things I knew they'd never get me. Bought my first used laptop with babysitting money while Kate got a brand new iPad, just because she's been having a hard week. I wasn't rebellious or anything. I stayed out of trouble, got decent grades, helped around the house. But even then, if Kate and I got into an argument, it didn't matter what the fight was about. I was always the one in the wrong. Every single time. Once, she broke my phone screen during a screaming match because I refused to let her snoop through my texts, and somehow I got grounded for escalating things. She got a pat on the head and a sympathetic, "She's just emotional, Alex." It wasn't just the big things. It was the little ones too. Like, if Kate wanted to watch something on TV, she got the remote, even if I was already watching. If we both wanted the last slice of pizza, Dad would hand it to her with a smile. I swear, sometimes I felt like a guest in my own house. Still, I kept it all inside. What was I supposed to do? Complain? Say, "Hey, why do you guys love my sister more than me?" That would just sound pathetic. Things only got worse when I started college. I stayed close to home to save money, commuted every day, worked weekends. I paid for my own books, my gas, even chipped in on groceries when I could. But none of that mattered. Kate started studying psychology and suddenly she was so mature, so thoughtful, wise beyond her years, according to Dad. I'd come home exhausted, hoping maybe someone would ask how my day went. But no. If I walked through the door while Kate was talking, I'd get shushed like I was interrupting the president's speech. At dinners, they'd hang on her every word like she was a prophet. Once, she told this completely made-up story about helping some kid having a panic attack in the library, and everyone was misty-eyed by the end. I'm 99% sure it never happened. You might be wondering, did I ever talk to them about it? No. Because I already knew how that would go. I'd get brushed off, maybe told I was being too sensitive, or worse, that I was jealous. So I kept pretending I was fine, even when it hurt. The worst part? I didn't even hate Kate. She could be a brat, sure, and she definitely knew she was the favorite, but I didn't hate her. I was just tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of pretending it didn't affect me. There was one moment, though, that really stuck with me. A couple of years ago, I came home from a late shift and overheard them in the kitchen. My mom was laughing and said something like, "Kate's always been our sunshine, hasn't she?" And Dad goes, "Yeah, we really hit the jackpot with her." Then they clinked glasses like it was some kind of toast. I stood there in the hallway, bags under my eyes, smelling like fried food, and just froze. No mention of me. No, we're proud of both our kids. Just Kate. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and something in me just broke. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I just felt numb. Like whatever hope I'd been clinging to had finally snapped. I decided then and there that I was going to finish school, get a decent job, and get the hell out. Not in a dramatic, "I'll show you" kind of way. Just quietly. Silently. If they didn't notice me while I was under their roof, maybe they wouldn't notice when I was gone. And you know what? I was right. But that's just the beginning. Because what happened next, What Kate did to me made everything else feel like a warm-up act for the real betrayal. I'll get to that soon. But let me know if you want me to keep going. So, like I said earlier, I'd been feeling like an afterthought in my family for as long as I could remember, but the first real signs of neglect started to show up in ways that were too specific to ignore. I think I was about 11 when it really hit me. That year, I'd worked my ass off preparing for the regional math competition. I wasn't just some average student who happened to be good with numbers. I studied for weeks, practiced logic problems every night, stayed late with my math teacher to go over strategies. When the day finally came, I crushed it. First place. A shiny medal with my name on it. I remember walking out of that auditorium with my chest puffed out, gripping the medal so tight it left a mark on my palm. I couldn't wait to get home and tell them. But when I walked through the door, medal still hanging around my neck, the living room was full of costume sketches and piles of glittery fabric. Kate had a school performance coming up. She was playing the role of some fairy or princess or something, and Mom and Dad were in full production mode. Mom was on her knees with a hot glue gun, and Dad was scrolling through Pinterest on the iPad looking for inspiration. I stood there in the hallway, waiting for someone to notice. Finally, I cleared my throat. "I won," I said, holding up the medal like it was some kind of golden ticket. My dad didn't even look up. "Great," he muttered, then turned to Kate and asked if she wanted to try sequins on the sleeves. My mom just gave me a quick smile and said, "That's nice, honey," without even making eye contact. Then she told me not to step on the tulle fabric she had laid out across the floor. I went up to my room, medal still around my neck, and sat on the bed for a long time. I didn't cry or anything. I just stared at the wall and felt this weird mix of pride and emptiness, like I'd done something big but no one else thought it mattered. That medal stayed in the drawer of my desk for years. I never showed it to anyone after that. A few years later, when I was 15, something inside me just gave up on trying to be noticed. I had a presentation coming up for history class, a full-on project I'd spent weeks working on. My teacher even asked if he could record it and use it as an example for future classes. It was a big deal to me, but I didn't tell my parents. Not because I forgot, not because I didn't want them there, but because I knew they wouldn't come. They wouldn't ask. And they didn't. That same week, Kate had a history poster due, some elaborate timeline of colonial America. It wasn't even a big assignment, just one of those group projects that gets graded mostly on participation. But of course, she turned it into a full-blown event. Mom stayed up with her until 2 in the morning gluing fake parchment and cutting out little redcoat soldiers from printed templates. Dad made a wooden frame for the poster like it was some museum piece. I came downstairs at one point to get a glass of water and found the kitchen looking like a crafting war zone, while my own hard-earned work was sitting quietly in my backpack upstairs, waiting for a day that no one in my family would even know existed. That was when I realized it wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was something deeper, a pattern, a way of life in our house. Kate's efforts weren't just noticed, they were celebrated. Mine? They weren't even acknowledged. It wasn't about who deserved attention. It was just that they never looked in my direction to begin with. I learned not to expect anything, not to get excited about sharing good news. I'd still put in the effort, I couldn't help myself, but I stopped hoping for praise. At 15, that's a lonely thing to carry, knowing that your success will echo into a void while your sister gets a round of applause for a last-minute drawing glued onto a foam board. And the worst part? No one ever noticed the silence I wrapped myself in. No one asked why I never invited them to school events. No one questioned why I never brought home certificates anymore. They just kept shining the spotlight on Kate, and I learned to exist in the shadows. But like I said before, all of this was just the setup. The real heartbreak? That would come later. And when it did, it would destroy everything I had left. So by the time I was 17, the neglect in my family wasn't just occasional, it had become systematic. I don't even think they realized it at that point. It wasn't about 1 or 2 bad days. It was about years of consistently putting me second, and acting like that was just normal. There was one thing I'd been looking forward to for years: learning how to drive. My dad used to talk about it like it was going to be this big father-son moment. Back when I was 13, he started dropping hints. "When you turn 16, we'll take the old Corolla out to the empty lot and I'll show you everything," he'd say. Stick shift, parking, merging, all of it. It's a rite of passage, you know. He talked it up so much, like it was going to be our thing. I held on to that idea for years, honestly. I imagined us on those quiet weekend mornings, just the two of us in the car, windows down, him explaining how to feel the engine, how to listen to the road. But then 16 came, and nothing happened. He was busy. There was always something going on with work, or something that needed fixing around the house. Then Kate had some volleyball tournament, then a dance recital, and then a school fundraiser. I kept waiting, kept hoping, until one day I finally asked, "Hey Dad, any chance we can start driving lessons this weekend?" I remember asking him while he was sitting at the kitchen table reading the news on his tablet. He didn't even look up. "Not now, Alex. Kate has a complicated biology project due Monday. She needs help with the diagrams and building that 3D cell model thing. Maybe next week." That "maybe next week" turned into "maybe next month," and then into "we'll get around to it," and eventually just faded into silence. I never brought it up again. I ended up learning to drive from my Uncle Brian, my mom's brother, who wasn't even close with our side of the family. He was more of a drop by once a year for a beer and disappear kind of guy. But one day at a family barbecue, I mentioned that I still hadn't learned how to drive, and he looked at me like I had 3 heads. "You're 17 and no one's taught you," he said, almost laughing. I just shrugged. The next weekend, he showed up in his pickup and said, "Let's go." We spent hours driving around the back roads outside of town. He was patient, surprisingly so, for someone who didn't even really know me that well. He taught me how to reverse into a parking space, how to handle a roundabout, even how to ease into traffic without jerking the wheel. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. And here's the part that really gets me: my dad didn't even notice. Weeks went by and I started driving regularly, running errands, picking up groceries, and still, he never said a word. The first time he saw me grab the keys, he looked mildly surprised and asked, "Wait, you're allowed to drive now?" I said yeah, I'd been driving for a while. Uncle Brian helped me out. He just nodded and went back to whatever he was doing, like it didn't even register. No questions. No follow-up. No, "Hey, sorry we never got to do that together." Nothing. By then, I wasn't surprised. I was used to being passed over, used to making my own milestones without their involvement. But that one hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed his approval, but because I realized I had stopped expecting it altogether. It wasn't just about driving. It was about all the other things they said they'd be there for, but never were. And in the back of my mind, I started asking myself a question I'd never dared to ask out loud. If I disappeared tomorrow, would they even notice? Anyway, that's where I was at 17, completely on my own, even when I was right there in the middle of the house. And like I said before, this wasn't even the worst part. The real betrayal? That was still coming. So by the time I was graduating high school, I should have known better than to expect anything different. But even then, part of me was still hoping that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. This was supposed to be a big moment. I'd worked hard, pulled off good grades, balanced school with a part-time job, and earned a few quiet academic honors along the way. And graduation? That felt like something even they couldn't ignore. I'd spent weeks imagining what it might be like. Seeing them in the crowd, hearing them cheer when my name was called, maybe getting one of those cringy but meaningful "we're proud of you" hugs. I knew it wasn't going to be some perfect movie moment, but I thought they'd at least show up on time. I thought they'd show they cared. But of course, they didn't. The ceremony started right at 6, just as the sun was setting behind the bleachers of our school's football field. My classmates were filing in, wearing those awkward gowns and square caps, half of them already crying or laughing too loud. I kept scanning the crowd, looking for familiar faces. Rows and rows of parents and siblings holding flowers, cheering, waving handmade signs. But no sign of mine. My name was called somewhere in the middle of the ceremony. I walked across the stage, shook the principal's hand, took the rolled-up diploma, and looked out into the crowd one last time. Still nothing. I went back to my seat, clapping for the others, keeping my face calm even though my stomach was twisted into knots. I kept thinking maybe they were stuck in traffic, maybe something came up, maybe they'd show up at the last minute and wave from the back row with those apologetic smiles they always used when they forgot something important. But they didn't show up until the whole thing was basically over. 40 minutes late. The final speech was wrapping up when I saw them walking across the field, looking around like they were confused about where to sit. Kate wasn't even dressed for the occasion. She was in her tennis warm-ups, ponytail still damp from whatever practice she'd had. My mom waved briefly when she spotted me, and Dad gave a little nod before they sat down on the far end of the stands, like they didn't want to make a scene. There were no photos, no flowers, no "we're proud of you," no moment. When the ceremony ended, I walked over to where they were sitting, still holding my cap and gown folded under my arm. Mom barely looked up from her phone. "Sorry we're late," she said. "Kate had an important practice match. Her coach thinks she might be picked for regionals." "That's great," I said, quietly, even though I felt like someone had punched a hole through my chest. Dad clapped me once on the back, a quick "good job, bud," like I'd just finished mowing the lawn. Kate barely said anything at all. She was scrolling through her messages, half listening to whatever was being said around her. We didn't go out to eat. We didn't take a single picture. They said they were tired and headed home early. I ended up grabbing takeout with a couple of classmates and sitting on the curb outside a fast food place, still in my dress shoes, eating fries in the dark. That night, I tossed my cap on top of my dresser and never looked at it again. The diploma stayed rolled up on my desk for weeks before I finally stuck it in a drawer. That was my graduation, the final stamp on a childhood full of being second place in my own family. And the worst part? I didn't even cry. I didn't yell. I didn't demand an explanation. I just accepted it, because by then, I knew that was all I was ever going to get. Now let me tell you about the day I graduated from university. The day I realized, without a doubt, that I truly meant nothing to the people who were supposed to care most. I'd done everything right. I graduated from a prestigious university with a 3.95 GPA in data science. Not an easy major. On top of my coursework, I held a part-time job nearly the entire time I was in school. Tutoring, lab assistant work, freelance coding gigs, whatever I could do to cover my share without asking anyone for help. I didn't party, didn't waste time, didn't cut corners. I just kept my head down and pushed through, thinking that if I worked hard enough, maybe I'd finally earn their recognition. A week before graduation, I sent a message in the family group chat. "Ceremony is Saturday at 2 p.m., I wrote. "I'll be walking across the stage with honors. Hope you guys can make it." No one replied. Not even a thumbs up. I told myself they were probably busy, that they'd answer later. Just to be safe, I sent a reminder the night before. "Just a heads up that graduation is tomorrow. Would really mean a lot if you could be there." Still nothing. Total silence. But I wasn't worried yet. I figured they'd show up. I'd given them the date, time, location. All they had to do was show up and sit down. That wasn't too much to ask, was it? That morning, I got dressed in my gown and cords, ironed my shirt, tied my tie the way I'd practiced for hours on YouTube. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to imagine them in the crowd, maybe even smiling, maybe even proud. When I got to the venue, I scanned the rows of seats while everyone else was getting settled. Classmates were pointing to their families, waving, laughing. One guy next to me kept saying, "There's my mom, right next to my sister, third row." I stood there trying to act like I was busy looking at something on my phone, but I kept glancing up, waiting for someone, anyone, to walk through the doors. They never did. My name was called near the end. I walked across the stage to the sound of scattered claps, none of them familiar. I smiled for the camera, shook the dean's hand, and walked off stage into the hallway where the graduates were gathering with their families. Except I had no one waiting for me. I sat alone on a bench near the exit while everyone else took photos, handed out flowers, and hugged their parents. I checked my phone, thinking maybe there had been a delay, maybe someone had texted to say they were running late. There was one message. From Haley, my girlfriend. Or at least, I thought she was. "Hey, sorry babe," it read. Kate's move turned into a whole ordeal. Her couch didn't fit through the stairwell and I promised I'd help. "I'll make it up to you, promise." I sat there staring at that message, trying to understand how my girlfriend could be at my sister's apartment on the day of my graduation. Kate was moving that weekend, sure, but we'd all known about it for weeks. She had friends, parents, a dozen people who could have helped her lift a couch. But Haley chose to be with her instead of showing up for me. Just like everyone else. None of my family came. Not my mom, not my dad, not Kate, not even a cousin or distant uncle. No one. I left the building without saying a word to anyone. Got in my car. Drove straight home. Still wearing the gown, still holding the fake diploma folder in my hand. That night, I didn't take a single photo. Didn't celebrate. Didn't hear from anyone in my family. The group chat stayed quiet. No congratulations. No questions. No, how did it go? Nothing. It was the clearest moment of my life. That even at my highest point, a degree I earned through 4 brutal years of work and sacrifice, I wasn't worth showing up for. After everything that happened on the day of my university graduation, the silence from my family, the empty chair where Haley should have been, there was one person who showed up. One person who reminded me that I wasn't completely invisible. Uncle Brian. My dad's older brother. The same guy who taught me how to drive when my dad couldn't be bothered. He wasn't someone I saw often, mostly holidays or the occasional barbecue, but over the years, he was the only adult in my family who ever made time for me. No lectures, no pressure, just quiet presence when I needed it most. That morning, while I was still trying to figure out whether anyone was going to come, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Brian. "I'm outside. Don't make me come knock on the door. I looked out my window and saw his black SUV in the driveway. I climbed in, and he gave me a look that said everything without needing to ask. He didn't mention the fact that no one else had shown up. He just nodded, handed me a coffee, and said, "Let's go get you that diploma." He sat through the entire ceremony, even when it ran long and the gym started to get stuffy. He clapped louder than anyone when I walked across the stage, and when I came back to my seat, he gave me a thumbs up like I just hit a home run in the bottom of the ninth. Afterwards, while everyone else was taking family photos and handing out flowers, Brian motioned for me to follow him. We got in his car, and I figured he'd just drop me off back at my place. But instead, he drove us across town to this high-end restaurant I'd only ever seen from the street. The kind of place with white tablecloths, valet parking, and a menu that doesn't list prices. We sat by the window, ordered steak and wine, and talked. Not just about school, but about what was next, what I wanted to do, where I saw myself going. I told him I wasn't sure, that I had options but no real plan. He didn't try to solve everything. He just listened. Then, after dessert, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope. "This is for you," he said, sliding it across the table. "Don't say anything until you open it." Inside was a check, $85,000. I blinked at it for a second, thinking maybe it was a mistake, maybe he meant to give me something else. But it was real. Signed, dated, and made out to me. I started to speak, but he cut me off. "It's not charity," he said. "I've been saving for years. Always figured you'd be the one to make something of yourself, and I wanted you to have a head start. Use it for whatever you need. Relocation, startup idea, grad school, doesn't matter. Just don't waste it sitting still." Then he pulled a second item from his pocket, a business card. Simple design, bold font, one name that stood out. Robert Halperin, HR Director, VentureLink IT, Austin. "He owes me a favor," Brian said. "I told him about you. He's expecting your call. Doesn't guarantee you the job, but it'll get you the interview. The rest is up to you." I didn't know what to say. After everything, after being ignored, forgotten, left behind by my own family, here was the one person who had no obligation to do any of this, showing up for me in every way that mattered. I nodded, quietly, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "Thank you," I said. He just shrugged. "You earned it. I'm just making sure someone notices." That night, I went home with a full stomach, a life-changing check, and the first real sense that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. After that dinner with Uncle Brian, everything started to change. A week later, I called the number on that business card he gave me. Robert Halperin picked up on the second ring. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Mostly about my background, my coursework, the projects I'd done in data science, and the part-time gigs I had kept up through college. He was sharp, but relaxed. Asked a lot of questions, none of them designed to trip me up. At the end of the call, he said, "I like the way you think. Let's get you on a video call with the team." That interview led to another, and then another. A week after that, I got the offer. $125,000 a year, plus relocation expenses. Health benefits. Signing bonus. All of it real, all of it in writing, not just a promise. It was the kind of offer people dream about, the kind that changes your life. And I didn't hesitate. I packed up everything I owned, dropped off a few boxes with Brian to hold on to temporarily, and made the move. I changed my number. Deleted every social media account connected to my name. Blocked every family member, every mutual friend, even Haley. I didn't leave a note, didn't send a message, didn't say goodbye. I just disappeared. 3,200 kilometers away, a new city was waiting. I found a one-bedroom apartment downtown. It wasn't huge, but it had big windows and a view of the skyline. Clean walls, polished floors, everything mine. I signed the lease, bought a new bed, new furniture, new clothes, and left the old version of myself behind like a skin I no longer needed. The job was challenging but good. The people were smart, focused, welcoming without being fake. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not because I was chasing approval, but because I was doing work that mattered and doing it well. I joined a gym 3 blocks from my building. Started working out again, lifting regularly, feeling my body come back to life after years of stress and tension. I went hiking on weekends, explored nearby trails, got lost in pine forests and mountain paths. I made friends, real ones, not out of obligation or proximity but because we clicked. People who didn't know anything about my past and didn't need to. For the first time, I had stability. No drama. No tension in my chest every time my phone buzzed. No more waiting for someone to show up who never would. I set my own routines, made my own meals, paid my own bills, and slept better than I ever had in my life. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't running away. This was freedom. 7 months after I started my new life, the messages started. First it was emails, then letters, then voicemails, one after another, from people I hadn't heard from since the day I graduated. People who hadn't shown up when I needed them, who had chosen my sister's needs, her events, her convenience, over me every single time. My father was the first to reach out. His message was short, almost formal, like we were old colleagues, not family. He said his business had collapsed, that some bad investments had wiped out his cash flow, and that the house I grew up in was now in foreclosure. He mentioned they had to sell Mom's car, that they were restructuring. He used all these business words like it was just some quarterly setback instead of the complete unraveling of the life they had once used to keep me at arm's length. My mom's messages were different. Rambling, emotional, full of passive guilt. She talked about how hard things had been lately, how everything is changing so fast, and how your father isn't the man he used to be. She didn't mention my name in the first few letters. She just kept writing about Kate. And Kate she wrote too. Just once. A single paragraph that somehow managed to avoid using the words sorry or I was wrong. She said her master's program had become too much and that she had decided to take a break. No one was surprised. She'd been carried her whole life. But this time, no one was there to carry her. Then came the texts from Haley. First a casual, hey, like we just stopped talking last week. Then longer messages, full of nostalgia and forced concern. She said she didn't realize how bad things had gotten. That she missed me. That she wanted to talk. But I didn't respond. Not to any of them. I had made my choice. I stayed silent. And then one day they came to my door. It was a Saturday afternoon. I'd just gotten back from the gym, earbuds still in, grocery bags in hand. I turned the corner of the hallway and saw them standing there, outside my apartment, my parents, both of them. Older, smaller than I remembered, like the weight of the past year had compressed them. They looked out of place on my clean, modern floor with their worn coats and tired faces. They didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me like they weren't sure if I was real. My mom took a step forward. Her voice cracked when she said my name. But I didn't say a word. I walked past them, unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. So after I shut the door in their faces, I thought maybe that would be it. Maybe they'd take the hint and finally let go. But a few minutes later, I heard a soft knock. Not loud, not demanding, just this quiet, persistent knock like they were trying not to disturb the neighbors. I stood there for a second, staring at the door, thinking about whether I even wanted to open it. Eventually, I did. They were still standing there. My mom holding her purse with both hands like it was keeping her grounded. My dad had his arms crossed but not in that usual way that meant he was angry. This time he looked tired, like he was bracing himself for something heavy. I stepped aside without saying anything, and they walked in slowly, like they weren't sure they were allowed. They sat down at the edge of my couch like guests in a stranger's house. Which, in a way, they were. I stayed standing. It was my mom who spoke first. "We found your address through Brian," she said quietly. "He didn't want to give it to us at first, but we told him we just wanted to talk." I didn't respond. I just waited. We've realized some things," she continued, her voice cracking. "How we treated you. What we didn't see. We were so focused on making sure Kate had everything she needed, we didn't notice what we were doing to you." Then my dad chimed in. "It wasn't fair. I see that now. I should have been better. We both should have." He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, he actually looked ashamed. But then he added, "We're in a really bad spot right now, Alex. The house is gone. Your mother's car too. Kate's not in school anymore. We're trying to stay afloat." That's when I understood why they were really there. They didn't come just to apologize. They came because they needed something. Money. Help. A safety net. They wanted me to fix the wreckage of the life they built without me in it. I stood there in silence for a long time. My arms crossed, jaw tight, heart pounding in my ears. Then I finally spoke. "This wasn't one event," I said. "It wasn't one bad day, or one missed ceremony, or one forgotten graduation. This was my whole life." My mom started to speak again, but I raised a hand to stop her. "I needed you for years. When I was 11 and won a regional math competition, and you were too busy picking out Kate's costume. When I was 15 and didn't even tell you about my school presentation because I knew you wouldn't ask. When you promised to teach me how to drive and then forgot because Kate had a biology project. When you showed up late to my high school graduation. When none of you came to my university graduation. Not even her." I pointed toward the door. "You didn't just fail once. You failed constantly. And now you want me to pretend that didn't happen?" Because your lives fell apart? No. My dad stood up then, like he was about to say something else, but I beat him to it. I rebuilt myself from the ground up without you. I am not your lifeline. I am not your backup plan. They both looked stunned. Like they hadn't actually expected me to say no. But I meant every word. Please leave, I said. My mom tried one more time. Alex, we're still your family. I shook my head. You stopped being my family the moment I stopped being useful to you. I opened the door and waited. They walked out slowly, saying nothing. My mom turned to look back once. My dad didn't. I closed the door behind them. After they left my apartment that day, I sat in silence for a long time. Not out of guilt, not because I questioned what I did, but because I knew it was finally over. The weight I had carried for years, the quiet hope that someday they would change, had finally been cut loose. A few days later, I wrote a letter. Not to start a conversation, not to offer a bridge back, but to end it clean and clear. I don't hate you, I wrote. But I don't need you. What I needed, you never gave. I don't carry anger anymore. I carry peace. Because I'm done waiting for something that never existed. Money doesn't heal trauma. Apologies don't rewrite years. I'm not interested in rebuilding. Please don't contact me again. I printed it, signed it, and mailed it. I haven't heard from them since. And the truth is, I've never been better. I continued living in that city, focused on my work, kept growing. Promotions came fast because I showed up every day and gave it everything I had. I made real friendships, not the kind based on proximity or obligation, but with people who saw me for who I was and respected me for it. I traveled, hiked mountains I used to only see in photographs, ate at restaurants I once thought I'd never be able to afford. I finally found what peace felt like, waking up without anxiety in my chest, going to sleep without the weight of being second best. My life moved forward. Theirs did not. Word eventually got back to me, not directly, but through Brian, who I still talk to sometimes. My father now works for a competitor of the company he once owned, doing mid-level admin work. Their big house was sold. They moved into a small rental in the outskirts of town. Kate is back living with them. No master's degree. No job. Just them, under one roof again, pretending like they're still the family they used to be. But I'm not a part of it. I live alone, but not lonely. My home is mine. My choices are mine. My freedom, my peace, my future, all of it earned. All of it built without them. I don't know if they ever sit around and wonder how things got to this point. I don't know if Kate ever thinks about the damage she helped cause. But I don't spend time trying to figure that out anymore. Because I'm happy. I'm free. And for the first time in my life, I belong exactly where I am, in a life I built, from nothing, by myself.